Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Improving Productivity with Labor Planning, sponsored by RIVET. I'm Mike Eby, Group Editorial Director for EC&M. Before I turn this session over to our speakers, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. First, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please put your question in the questions window and a technical expert will help solve your problem. We recommend you disable any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browsers, as this can sometimes cause issues with your webinar player. Additionally, we welcome your questions during today's event. We will answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation. Feel free to send your questions in at any time. They'll go into a queue. To do so, simply type your question into the Ask a Question window on the side of your screen and hit the Submit button. We'll also be recording today's session, and that'll be made available on the EC&M website within the next week, and you'll get an email notification when that archive is available for viewing. We'll provide a certificate of attendance for attending this webinar. You just need to stay on for a minimum of 50 minutes today, and you will qualify for that certificate. The certificate will be emailed within 1 hour of the conclusion of this webinar. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ryan Meitl, CEO of RIVET Work. He's an electrical engineer that's turned construction tech leader, and he's on a mission to enable every self-performing contractor with a labor plan that they can execute against and ultimately improve their bottom line. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you, and you can introduce a couple of guests that you've got for the webinar today as well.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm happy to be here. I'm joined by two subject matter experts on labor planning and workforce management in electrical construction. And I'll introduce them both here in a second, but I wanted to start first by giving an overview of the agenda and what we're going to cover here today. So we'll start out first by just establishing some goals for the webinar. Big believer in if you don't set goals, you won't achieve them. So we'll start there, and then we'll go into the who. First, who you'll be hearing from. So you'll hear from Kyle and from Andrew, who have joined me. And then we'll also cover who this is for. And then we'll dig into the why. And I kind of call this the bottom line up front, but like if you can't stay for the entire webinar, give you an overview of kind of like some of the key takeaways. And then we'll dive into labor planning at electrical contractors doing construction, and hopefully pull out some useful nuggets about things to look out for, some practices you can take back to your business. And honestly, worst case, you'll hear about stuff that you see and live every single day, and you'll just know you're not alone. So I think that's a worst case outcome for everybody here on the call. And so with that, really quickly, the goals, first we're going to kind of define the electrical contracting labor planning process. So hopefully we'll get some common language around that. Then we'll explore some early warning signs. You'll hear from Kyle and Andrew about what this looks like in their business and what they can do about it. And then 3, again, hopefully we'll discuss some labor planning best practices that you can take back to your business. So with that, I'll give a little bit more background on myself. I'm an electrical engineer by training. Prior to starting RIVET, I worked in lighting and controls for the better part of a decade. Our why at RIVET is we believe that we can improve labor productivity and profit on projects through a better labor planning process, kind of built on top of a workforce management business process. That's why we built our workforce management software platform, and in that we're the market leader amongst electrical construction. We built our companies for electrical contractors, and so for those electrical contractors on the webinar, we're a NECA partner, we're an Electric Council member, we're an IEC partner, we're an ABC partner, and we work with both big and small electrical contractors doing construction work. I've got two great contractor guests here with me today. Both of them are in the weeds on labor planning every single day, building, executing their company labor strategy. So I'll start with Kyle. So Kyle Sutter, Director of Construction at Westfall & Co. Kyle, you started your career out in the field. Would you mind giving a little introduction of yourself and your company?
Yeah, Kyle Sutter, Director in Construction at Westfall and Company. Probably a similar path to a lot of people in operations roles. Worked at Westfall now for just over 24 years. Started out as a apprentice 5 days after I graduated high school, and just slowly worked my way up through the field to a superintendent role where I worked in some data center construction projects. And about 5 years ago, I transitioned to the director of construction, which is a similar role. Some companies have a superintendent, but overseeing all of our Wisconsin field labor.
Thank you. And Andrew, you also started out in the field. Would you please give an introduction of yourself and a little bit about interstates?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so I also, like Kyle, started out as an apprentice electrician. Worked my way up from there about 13 years ago, joined the interstates as a journeyman. Continued to work my way through the field, led projects for interstates. Then about 5 or 6 years ago, began a transition out of the field and into more of the operations side of the business. So currently working as a workforce manager. So most of that duty is the workforce planning, capacity planning, and really helping figure out how we're going to staff the jobs. Yeah, with interstates, we're based out of the very northwest corner of Iowa in a little town called Sioux Center. We've got about 11 locations around the country, and pretty well work anywhere in the lower 48 that our clients want us to go. So we're primarily in the more of the industrial sector, but we also venture into, like everybody else, into the data centers and that kind of thing as well. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So I said next we talk about who this is for. So, top line here, this is for electrical contractors and other self-performing trade businesses. And as Mike said in his introduction, our mission at Rivet is to enable every self-performing contractor to have a labor plan that they can execute against, and that increases basically the profit on their jobs. And as you can see here on the left, this is just a small snapshot of the more than 100 contractors, market-leading contractors that we work with at Rivet, from electrical, mechanical, and also self-performing GCs. So bottom line up front, I think everybody here knows how important labor is, especially in today's labor market, which is more constrained probably than it's ever been in most of our lifetimes. Labor is for, a self-performing business like number one or number two in dollars on jobs. And it's usually the number one risk factor, like how you deploy, how your people execute really determines the profitability of every job. And, we believe that having a labor plan improves your field's productivity and therefore the profit on the jobs. And having a workforce management business practice is the way that we teach and the way that our customers build and maintain and manage, the labor plans for their business. And you need a software platform, right, for construction in order to do all of this. So next, I wanted to just create some common ground around what is a labor plan. And a really simple way to define it is how you allocate your people to execute all the projects you're undergoing as a business. Starting from a job, and all of these job labor plans roll up into your company labor plan and your company workforce capacity. And, just trying to make the simplest picture possible, there's kind of like two phases of this. The first is pre-construction. Every labor plan starts with a bid, its tasks and its hours to start. But once a pursuit becomes close enough to you think you're going to get awarded, again, you turn that into a forecast. And for most contractors, like this is by headcount, by week, over the lifetime of the project or what you think the project is going to run through. Again, in pre-construction, if you think you're going to be awarded the work or the project's been awarded but not started, typically starting to identify those field leaders that you're going to have run those jobs, both like superintendents, general foreman, maybe even like the foreman that are going to be running the crews on the jobs. And knowing that, the timelines may shift, but you generally like got an idea of who's going to be sort of running those projects for you. And in the construction phase, you get into this like loop where you've got the forecast. Now you're scheduling the entire workforce into that against that forecast. And as the job is progressing, you're measuring, you're processing changes, you're updating that forecast, and then you're like rescheduling against that updated forecast. And so at its simplest form, like this is what we think about when we talk about a labor plan. Next, I want to ask you first you, Kyle, like, you mind walking us through your labor planning process at Westfall? Kind of like, where does it start? Who's involved at the beginning? And then like, all the way through sort of like project execution and project completion.
Yeah, I think at Westfall, I always, excuse me, I always use the term that schedule your backlog. I think that's one of the most powerful things about a work management tool is that with the way you can forecast and you can schedule, you can really see every job that you have under contract. You can see exactly how that is going to work out. What I've come to find out more as we schedule our work is how much we use those curves in the get work side of our business. As I'm working with our pre-construction teams about opportunities similar to what Ryan talked about, where we're looking to fill holes. Maybe a project doesn't fit because we're overstaffed. So we're always looking at, where these projects fall into line, how our field supervision coming off of other similar projects and can transition into those projects. We also look at when we're tracking classifications and putting in the placeholders for those people that we need on these certain projects, as we all are getting familiar with the IRA standards and apprentice ratios that we're facing here in Wisconsin. Well, we can start to make sure that we have the staff that we need to bid and get those projects. So it all starts in pre-construction. As we get into the actual project awarded side and our, it really starts for us at our pre-job meeting where we're setting up our project teams and building these in-depth curves through Rivet where we can really see what it looks like. We're communicating that with our field teams. And then as we go through the projects, we're updating our placeholders and schedules and looking for, as we'll talk about in a little while, some schedule slips or maybe some areas where we can pull some work forward to make sure that every project is allocated appropriately.
Yeah, and who all's on these project teams at Westfall?
So, in our pre-job meetings, we'll start with myself, the project manager, project executives, our superintendents, general foreman, whoever our field leaders are. Depending on the size of our projects, we'll get our, VPs and presidents involved in some of those decision-making things.
Great, thank you. And Andrew, would love to hear, you share a little with the audience about how your process looks at interstates. Again, like kind of starting in pre-construction all the way through execution, like who's involved and what does it look like end to end?
Yeah, can do. So we kind of operate in a few different groups. So the way we're made up, we have regional offices that kind of operate inside of a radius of their location, and then we've got our traveling group, our national construction group, which is the group I work closely with day in and day out. So we kind of do this in the same process in these individual groups, but oftentimes we will cross over, share resources, that kind of thing. So we typically start this with our go, no-go decisions. So when we have potential job opportunities, those are brought to a decision-making group. And we look at, there's a number of factors, but one of the things we look at is the timeline and the potential that we would have the staff to execute the work. So these are decisions that are being made weekly, whether or not we're going to pursue a project. So being able to have this extended forecast that we're keeping up really gives us the insight that we need to make those decisions. So once that pursuit decision is made, yes, we're gonna go after this job. So I'll back up. So the folks involved in those decisions, we've got executives, we've got project executives and project management staff, along with business development. I'm in there with representing the workforce planning and capacity planning aspect. So once a decision's made that yes, we're going to move forward with this opportunity, we're getting that into our CRM. Whether we're giving it our best stab at we think it's this big, we think it's this many hours. A lot of that's usually based off past experience or similar projects. Or if we have the information, we're getting as good of information as we can right at the beginning. And I'm taking that and I'm plugging that in, and I'm creating what's our best case curve that we can come up with for this project. As we go through the bid process, that information starts to get fleshed out. We get a better idea, or we get the price in on the job. We got a better idea on hours and that kind of thing. We'll continue to refine that information, and we'll keep that plugged into our overall labor plan. So we'll be able to see existing project plus future, so we can kind of plan. And that way too, like Kyle was saying, you can see where you have the gaps, or you can see where the peaks are, so where a project may or may not fit. Once that project's awarded, it usually goes to that project management team that's going to run with it, or the pre-con team. From there, myself or one of my counterparts, we are keeping up with that group through the planning phase and execution, keeping at least weekly contact, keeping up on schedule changes, things like that. We'll continue to update our forecast on that project throughout the life cycle, from the ramp up, the peak, and then the exit strategy off that job. And so by doing that, we can look at it individually, job by job, but then we get this holistic picture of what are we doing company wide and what's our capacity. So that's what helps drive a lot of decision making.
Thank you for that. It's really insightful. One of the first things I think you guys both talked a lot about is your workforce capacity. And, so what happens when you don't have capacity aligned with the project needs you have? Like, let's say you need more people than you have. What does that do to you, and how important is it to you to be able to see ahead and make sure that this doesn't happen? Andrew.
Yeah, if we can see that we have more people than we currently have work, that allows us to be really intentional about what kind of projects we're looking for, size of projects, timelines, where is it going to fit. In turn, also we can predict these peaks. For us, a lot of our work is in the Midwest. So winter is usually steady. Summer is usually our peak season. So we can usually see where these peaks are going to build, or if several large projects are going to lay over the top of each other, and what kind of impact that is going to have. That allows us to really fuel some decision making when it comes to recruiting and hiring. So where do we need to focus? Kyle alluded to licensing ratios. So doing work in multiple states, we can see where we're going to have that work. Another function of Rivet is being able to keep all of our certification and licensing in that for all of our people in that one piece of software. So if I know, hey, we're going to be working in this location, I've got within an easy reach, okay, what are our resources for that area? Do we have licenses? Do we need to hire? Do we need to start testing? So it allows us to really plan ahead for all those things. The other thing with that too is if we're planning for those peaks and we can do it the right way, there's always, like a lot of folks do, we always have the option to bring in temporary labor, but we all know that's going to drive our dollar per hour up on the job, and we're going to incur more cost and dig into the profits. So if we can curb that a bit, that's extremely helpful.
Kyle, what about you?
Well, I mean, for us in this labor market, as we all know, seeing the capacity demands earlier to make timely hires is really the biggest thing for me. Also, with the way that our project teams are updating, on a daily to weekly basis, we're really seeing how those curves are moving, like I said, very timely to make make it so that I can make the decisions about getting people hired when it makes sense. Being able to see that also, like we keep talking about, just filling in those gaps. We all know how important labor is for all of our businesses right now. So to make those decisions to get projects to keep labor so that, you know, the little dips, like Andrew said, in the winter, the Midwest here, but, you know, level that stuff out so that we can keep increasing through apprenticeship, through our entry-level CW program. We're able to get those people to make sure that we can hit those capacity demands in the, you know, I always say you can see them 8 to 10 months in advance with the way this large construction goes in our area. Then you always have the one-off stuff that fills some of that stuff in and even peaks it a little bit more, but just really the timely hires for us.
And Kyle, Westfall's grown a ton over the last 10 years. Like, do you think you guys could have achieved that without like disciplined approach to projections and managing capacity?
I don't know how it would be possible for me to do my job right now without a workforce management tool. I mean, we've doubled revenue wise and field employees in the last 5+ years that I've been here. So just being able to see that and grow with the times, make the most of our opportunities. Spreadsheets would be tough. Let's just put it that way. It also leads to so much. It also leads to being able to see that stuff just has really promoted growth within, as we're trying to grow within and grow foreman. From the people get the opportunities so much earlier, and you might move person to a job just for an opportunity, and then to watch them thrive is a really pretty cool part of being able to see so much in the future.
Yeah, thank you. It's so important. You know, another thing you guys both talked about with me here in the past is the importance of staffing early in the job. You know, again, critical part of labor planning. And so, start with you here, Kyle. Like, the first 35% of the job, like, how important is that to you, and how does it impact, you know, the trajectory of the project and what you think how you think it's going to unfold?
Well, it's, as we all know in construction, it's to us, it's one of the most critical parts to make sure that as we're looking at how these large construction projects, how the schedules are working out in that first 35% is really going to set the pace of what's going to finish through peak and ramp down on the ends. So for us, we train on it. We're looking at it. We have RIVET, the reports that we can get out of it really help us just understand the plan that we put together as far as our ramp up to peak, understanding why we're maybe under or over those peaks. So as soon as we see projects going either way, obviously we're going right to earn value to see if, is there something wrong here, or are we actually winning? I'm talking about understaffed now. Like, so when you're able to figure that out, you can possibly be setting yourself up for a really successful project when you see those phases coming in under, or you just start to see, as we start communicating with our project teams about, right, the concrete's not getting poured, the footings aren't going in, there's some permitting issues, and we just know that that's going to lead to massive compression when we're trying to get electricians off the project at the end to go to another project. So for us, it's a hypersensitive thing right now. Almost every project, we're in it every day looking at this.
Andrew, you talked about this too, how important it is to you guys, also front end of the job. So what does it mean to you, and how do you, how do you predict the future based on that early part?
For sure. Yeah, being an electrical contractor, 60% of our work always falls past the back half of the job. But knowing we still got to execute that 40% up front, if we're not staffing the job up at the pace we need to, typically those hours have to go somewhere. So it's not often that the back end of the job is that finish date's going to push out. So this allows us to recognize early on, hey, are we staffing up at the pace we need to execute in this time frame and maintain this peak that we're planning? Or there's a couple different things that are going to happen. If we're lagging behind, it's obviously it's going to push our peak, or it's going to have to push the date. So that's with that, there's going to be a lot of conversations that are going to happen on that project to come up with some solutions. Obviously, there's typically costs involved in things like that. So no, this usually will set the pace. I would say I think everyone probably would agree, the last several years, equipment, material delays, and all these things that have been impacting construction have really impacted the front end of all these jobs and getting them out of the ground. So generally, we're able, gauging that first 35-40%, we're really able to predict well what we feel is going to happen in the back end and start those conversations early to come up with solutions so really being proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah, it's so important to see if things are going bad early. And I think you guys have both talked about just you start those conversations as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be too late, and then you're just riding the roller coaster instead of creating your own destiny. Which kind of like leads into one of the other things we've talked about, which is schedule slippage. You guys have both mentioned schedule slippage. Kyle, I think there's like a specific example here where the people on site's going up and it's supposed to go up and then it goes down. And what does that mean? And you want to talk to that a little bit?
Well, I think we've all been part of projects like this. But when we see something like this that you have here, we're starting conversations with the construction manager, general contractor right away. As you can see here, we can show them exactly what this compression is going to do to us. It's going to create massive amounts of overtime, trade stacking. So just a really good example of what a project looks like when there's major schedule slippage. So a lot of overtime built into this one right here, and it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, Andrew, what about you? How do you spot this? How do you spot your schedule slippage early?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just you've got a good visual there, and we can see if according to the labor plan, and a lot of times, so we'll take like an industry standard curve is how we'll start, and then we'll start working that with the schedule. I generally will have our PMs on the project. We'll work through that exercise, and we'll work together to get this as up to date as possible. Well, as we're starting to ramp the project, if we start delaying those starts, or pushing people off, or there's a good example there where it looks like we added some folks, then had to back some off the job. That's a pretty good indicator that the tail end of this project is going to get pretty tough. So like Kyle was saying, trade stacking becomes an issue. There's only so much physical space usually to get the work done. So then that leads to things like lots of overtime or running a second shift or a night crew. So again, this is all good things to catch early. And again, I'll probably sound like a broken record, but it spurs those important conversations to be proactive about what you're going to do to solve the problem. This definitely helps eliminate the oh no moments where it's like, oh no, we got a real problem. And so you have enough time to work the plan, or the project management staff has enough time to work with the client or the general contractor or the other contractors on site to come up with a solution before it gets really bad.
Right. Yeah. So even if it's not your fault, right, then it's not because of another job that didn't ramp down right. Like, you can get ahead of it. You can give your general contractor the options. Like, we can extend it, or we're going to have to run overtime, and like overtime's not in the plan, and we didn't cause the overtime. And so don't have to eat all the margin yourself, ideally. Well, great. which kind of leads us to the back end of the jobs. And I think this is like near and dear to both of you and probably most contractors, right? Holding on too many people too late in the project could be caused by schedule slippage. But also, if you do a good job up front, like Kyle, you talked about, is it real or is it not real that we've understaffed the job? Are we like ahead, or did we just understaff and we're going to have to like spend those hours later? How do you avoid holding on to people too late at the end? And how do you know it's happening?
Well, I think as we all know, sitting here right now, that instead of those blue lines there, that should be green, right? That's money going out the window. So for Westfall, a lot of other contractors, setting up that exit strategy where we're building a last 25% of the job, really almost an internal punch list of remaining scopes of work to make sure that we have the right staff on the job. And it's also for us understanding that our projections are right. So there's a huge financial part of this as we're getting the buy-in from our foremen, from our project managers as they're building this list, and we're walking the jobs with other superintendents will bring job people in, look at it, and really just get a buy-in and a company buy-in on how these last 10,000, 20,000 hours are going to go on these projects to make sure that we're on. Then we're locking the schedules in Rivet, comparing that to the WIP that you can pull out of Rivet, making sure that those numbers with how we have the stuff scheduled line up. And then there's a lot of hard conversations that are had around getting people off the sites, project teams, just one more week. Well, we all know what happens when that electrician stays on that job for one more week. It turns into 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so on and so forth. So when people are talking to me and people are supposed to be leaving the projects, it's like, well, did we get the change order? Did something happen? Like, why did the plan from 3 weeks ago change already? Why is this person needed to stay? And a lot of times we can work through it and get the person off the site and follow our curve of the plan that we set up. And it's a really big part of our business as we look at the ramp up to make sure, but the coming down is the part where the money's saved on the projects are made.
Andrew, what would you add?
And I'll just add, like, we have found where we were wrong. I mean, that's what's so powerful for it. And pulling those special resources, maybe some strategic overtime to really try and get that thing back to where it needs to be and get back on our curve.
Yeah, I'll add that. Kyle was talking a bit about it also, but finishing out a job strong is also going to help us finish that next one or start that next one correctly and off on a strong foot. So being able to make sure we're hitting that ramp down as we should is really important. There's a lot of other good insights here as well. Occasionally I'll work with a project manager on a job and I can see, hey, you're wanting to schedule these guys way over what our current plan is. And again, that leads to an important conversation. And sometimes it's, yes, we're in talks of there's going to be this change order tacked on the end. I'm going to need this many people for this long to do it. Again, it's going to get myself and my colleagues who are doing this overall larger pictures labor planning. It's going to get us that information sooner so that we have a good idea of what's actually going on. That's also going to help us, let's say we're just following the curve and we're not paying attention to what they're actually planning on. Well, I could have already contacted that person and said, hey, here's your next job. I need to be here on this date and it's in this location. And then we've got the crew on site says, no, you can't do that. You got to stay here for this. Then there's a ton of confusion, upsets the employee generally. So really just having a good visualization of what this is doing always leads to those conversations early enough to where we can be organized and give our employees the right information as well as that job's coming to a close.
Yeah, one of the things you said really stuck out, Andrew, which is like the ramp down is not just about that job, right? It's about the next job. And I think like what we hear so much is contractors getting in this vicious cycle where you're over, and so you understaff the next job, and then you get compressed on the next job, and then you're over, and then you understaff the next job, and it's a vicious cycle, and it's a big cause of margin loss. I know you guys have both lived it at times, I'm sure, but that's it's not just about like the single job. It's about like the overall holistic labor plan, because every single job has tendrils like into the next job, and it takes a lot of discipline. Takes a lot of discipline to actually like follow through and try to like make it all match up, because it's not easy. All right, so those are the 4 early warning signs that we covered. We had a couple best practices. I think we're like running close to the tail end, so we'll run through these pretty quick. But you both kind of talked about pursuits, forecasting high probability pursuits. Andrew, do you want to like kick us off? Like, how important is this, and what does it mean?
Yeah, for us, this is super important. I think without this, we'd be taking jobs blind without really a great idea of what the future holds. So this impacts a lot of things, obviously. So this can help us determine, do we have enough field leadership to handle these projects? How do they line up with our current? So the way Interstates works, we do not like to hire and lay off with jobs. We like to have our core running group of electricians that we can keep busy all the time. So the more we can, my perfect world is that thing runs pretty flat. Obviously, that's not the way it works, but the closer we can get to that, the happier I am. But making sure our folks always have work, and then making sure we're hitting the goals we're after as well. So laying out and being able to track these opportunities, that the way we do it, we kind of we take our high probabilities, and those are probably what we put the most time and effort into, and make sure we've got these on in our capacity forecast graphs. But we're also tracking even those medium and even some of those low probability things that we might have a shot at. And this allows us to pick and choose, lay in which jobs we want to look at and see what kind of an impact they have on our overall labor demand. And again, make good, better educated decisions.
Anything you add, Kyle?
No, he hit it right on the head there. But just, I think that ability to be able to, what if this, what if that, and see it in real time with high level dates and hours, what it looks like, for most of us, you're talking 2 years in the future, and how those curves overlap really just helps us make some business-wise decisions.
Yeah. And as you both said, if the capacity is not lined up, you're running overtime, or you're having to sub it out, or find temp labor, and like all of that impacts your bottom line. So both talked about reviewing the plan, but have a plan. I think first, I think you're all in alignment and got to have a plan, and then review the plan frequently. Andrew, I think you've talked with me about these like pretty frequent PM, like making sure that they have a curve, like again, like what the requests are like against the curve.
Yeah, that's right. So we can obviously we pull some hours information on the jobs, and we will go through and compare it to what we have planned out in Rivet for the project. But also we just have very regular scheduled touch points with the project managers on the jobs to make sure what we're tracking is real. Sometimes the data gets skewed a little bit. So really talking to those guys that are on the front line of the project and making sure we've got this trued up is super important. So it's a bit of work, but it's 100% worth it because it makes life a lot easier in the end. I think I said it already. It just being able to have the plan's never perfect, right? We all know construction, and it's always changing. But being able to continue to rework that plan throughout the course of the project really helps eliminate those oh no situations that we want to avoid.
And I was just talk about here is when you have workforce management in place and you really have that source of truth, the plan, and then as all of our project teams are, super focused on their projects, and as they're adjusting labor, it's telling me when maybe some people are coming available a little bit earlier, and you're just able to see that so fast. We're not sitting in long labor meetings every week on Fridays. At that point, then discovering we're 30 people short. We're able to see it, make timely moves, and it just keeps everything running so much smoother with the one source of truth. No side spreadsheets, no side deals with project teams sharing people in between. At Westfall, like the project managers and the field teams, if somebody's available, they're showing them to me, and I'm placing them where they need to go.
Yeah, I'll add to that on what Kyle was saying too. I think in being able to use this, and again, we've touched on this section of what Rivet can do, but as we've deployed this software through our regional offices, I've also heard from several folks that when they have their weekly workforce reviews or manpower planning meetings, it allows them to spend the time on the stuff that's important. They don't have to sit there and go, okay, Jim, he's good. Bob, they're good. It lets them easily point to, here's a decision we need to make, or here's a problem we need to solve. We get it done and we're saving time. So that's another huge benefit from this, I think.
Great. We kind of already covered this, but it's worth bringing back up again. Sticking to the exit strategy, or as you said, Kyle, when you found out that you were wrong, like you can make a plan, but sticking to the exit strategy. Kyle, what's you want to add anything to this?
Right, sometimes you gotta roll with the punches, but just it really brings on the tough conversations about can we just try to get a person off this job, because we all know how critical that is, and make sure our financials are right, like I said before. But just, I don't know, I always talk about the plan that we change all the time.
Anything you'd add, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree. And again, I sound like a broken record, but being able to have this visualized really helps spark those conversations. We all, oftentimes we run into, and when I did the same thing when I was in the field, I'm going to hold on to the people who I want as long as I can hold on to them. But being able to have that conversation and say, hey, I know this is where we're sitting at. This is the plan we've had. We've got to get this next one off and running. And then be able to negotiate who we need to get off that job and when.
So this last one, we haven't really talked about. Kyle, I know you brought this up, and I think, I think it ties really nicely into, that job where, you staffed up along the curve, and then all of a sudden people are coming off the job, and Andrew, it's an oh no moment. Like, what do you do? So Kyle, do you want to talk to this as a best practice you guys have at Westfall?
Yeah, so obviously people have heard of Awad Hanna from the University of Wisconsin. So we have a lot of relationships with what he does, and really just, looking into that productivity side of projects. So for us, we call him a productivity specialist. Maybe people would call them their superintendents, but for us, it's a very high functioning individual. He came from the field a couple years ago, and just getting out there and working on both sides of the curves, but getting out there and working with our project teams when needed. So this person for us, we can dispatch them to any job that we need to at a moment's notice. He's communicating with me a lot. I'm listening, hearing issues that might be coming up on projects. So I dispatch him there. And he is really working with our project teams to, right when you get in those tough spots at the end of jobs, we lose focus on the prefab part of it or the design part of it that could help us get people off the job. So he's out there bringing stuff into prefab, designing drawings, and overall just kind of comforting our project teams of, hey, we'll get through this, working with me to say, hey, we should really look at getting some high powered people to this project, maybe for some strategic overtime or something like that, just to prove to our project teams that we're there to support them. So really the eyes and ears of our field that touches almost every one of our projects in one way or another.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. We are, I think, at the end of our time. Now it's time for questions. I've got one last sort of like plug, little teaser here. I think both Kyle and Andrew have talked about workforce management. We haven't really talked about workforce management, about what it is, but just want to offer that we have completely free resources on our website, which kind of like overviews like the workforce management practices that both Interstates and Westfall here, follow in their business to build and maintain their labor plan. So if you don't have a labor planning process that quite reflects what these guys talked about today, want to learn what it takes, we've got free resources. We've got like an ebook, and there's other additional like webinar and video content too about what that looks like. And so, these are our pillars of workforce management: forecasting, rostering, scheduling, communicating, productivity information. So if you'd like to learn more, feel free to head over to our website after the webinar and take a look. Free resources, and here's some QR codes if you'd like to scan one. And with that, we're going to move on to Q&A. And so I'll leave this up here while we kick off the Q&A. And Mike.
All right, thanks, guys. Great conversation. Generated a lot of good questions that have come into the queue. So I'll just jump right into those. One last quick comment before I do. As I said, this is being recorded. It'll be available on the EC&M website. So if you've missed it or you think somebody within your organization would really benefit from the conversation today, definitely share the link with them once you get that email from us, and they can definitely watch on demand. So just wanted to throw that out there. All right, so I'll start off here. First question is going to be from Ray, and Ray would like to know, would either of you, Kyle or Andrew, tell us a couple stories maybe, or at least a story about what things improved at your company after starting the use of Rivet?
Well, I'll go. I know we're getting short on time here, so I'll go first. Previously, just the horror stories that we hear about labor meetings, right? And the fighting over people, and 2 to 3 hours a week of sitting with project teams fighting over people. We have a weekly touch point right now. If it takes me 10 minutes, we have a weekly touch point on labor, and if it takes me 10 minutes every week, that's a long meeting for us. It's really just a review, just to make sure that everybody knows what's happening and what I'm seeing is correct. But like Andrew said before, we're able to spend so much more time focusing on the productivity part of projects with that 2 hours a week. So I would say that for us, getting out of those meetings has really increased efficiency on our project management teams, especially.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's the same situation here. I was probably doing five hours a week between all the project managers on the jobs. I've taken those meetings to every other week, and again, instead of an hour, we're lucky if it's 15 minutes. Usually it's a touch base. Has anything changed? Okay, here's one issue. Here's an update on what we're working on, that kind of thing. So that's been huge. I know another one for us is, and again, it's not something we totally touched on today, but being able to have all of our people in one system working it the same way. We no longer have those situations where, Joe calls on Friday and says, "Hey, where am I supposed to be Monday?" And we go, "Oh man, how do we not know this?" Not that happened super often, but it did happen on occasion. So we're making sure we've got everyone tracked. We know where they're at. We know how long they're going to be there. We know where they're going next, and we can keep up on communication with them. So that's been a huge win for us.
All right, thanks, guys. Those are good examples to share. Appreciate it. All right, John asks, I'm on the technology side of the house. Why is the high probability pursuits graph forecasting scheduled workers manning down even below the requested labor? Somebody want to tackle that one?
I don't know, Ryan.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
on the specific example, I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll take it then.
The question was that.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So really, when you're looking at your pursuits, you're kind of stacking that orange line that we saw before is kind of stacked on top of everything. So you got to do a little mental math with it, but it just helps you see where that fills in is how we use it at Westfall.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next question comes in from James. Ryan, you mentioned margin loss a few times during the presentation today. Does Rivet have the feature to forecast labor dollars in addition to labor hours?
It's a great question. What we do in Rivet today in terms of labor dollars is, through an integration. So you have to choose to implement integrated. We can pull in your fully loaded labor cost for each person or each role into the platform. And then when you're looking at your roster for the day or the week, we will calculate your average, your composite labor rate, and you can compare that against, your bid. And so, a lot of contractors manage this, by ratios, right? And that's how they try to track to the bid, dollars per hour that's in the bid. But we can go a little more granular and actually pull and apply, the loaded labor costs on top of the specific people that you've got scheduled on that project to give you that composite rate for the, for what you have on the job site today. So that's how we help today. We're not yet fully projecting what the labor dollar will be at the end of the job. We don't do that integration yet today, but it's something that you'll see at some point in the platform.
All right, appreciate the answer there. All right, let's see. Brian would like to know: are you probably best Kyle and Andrew address this one? Are you sharing your forecast from day one with the construction manager or the general contractor?
I'll take this first. Yeah, we do. I mean, some form of it, right? We might dumb it down a little bit, but yeah, we're showing them because we want to get that to them early on because, right, we talked about compression over and over today. So if we can prove to them early on, hey, this is our plan, it fits your schedule, this is the number of electricians we're going to allocate to your project, and then we can start showing them what those schedule slips do. We're just educating over and over. This is what we're doing. This is what this is doing to us. And we also use it a lot in our get work side of it to show our company resource profile, saying hey, this project lines up perfect for us. We have this many resources available in a year. So that's really how we're using the forecasting outward facing to contractors.
All right. Let's see. Next question up is from Brian. Does the project manager or yourself manage updating the forecasted manpower on the projects?
We do that, kind of a hybrid, really. I've got some project managers who love to get in there and do it themselves. I've got others who would prefer to do it the way they've always done it. Send me, hey, here's my updated labor curve for the project. And it's a very, very quick process to go in and update that. So we kind of take both approaches, and I kind of go with whatever that person prefers to do.
I'll just hit real quick for us. It's the project managers. When you look at project manager being financially responsible for a project, labor being obviously one of our biggest risks on a project, they're the one that's feeding me the information. So they understand what labor moves do to their project financially.
All right. Thanks, guys. Let's see. Ephraim would like to know. He says, I found many times that at the end of the job, there's a never-ending punch list of items. We don't have a good plan and the punch list through the whole project. What's the best way to help GCs understand that putting punch lists together don't have to be completed today, but they are?
Yeah, that's a great one. I would just say, right, as you're communicating what your labor should look like on jobs, really just helping them understand that, hey, we got electricians leaving this job, pushing them. If you have this stuff coming, let us know. But these people are leaving. So the longer you put it off, the longer it's going to take us to do it.
All right. Let's see. We'll go to this question from Jim. Can you tie Rivet to a WBS as well?
Yeah, Ryan, do you want to go through any of those integration?
Yeah, so I mean, like in terms of like taking the project, breaking it into cost codes, and even like tasks, activities, we don't do that yet today, and so it kind of like exists like a level above that. But in the future.
Okay. Let's see. We've got a question from Jim here. Will this software tie into scheduling software to help generate a resource-loaded project schedule?
Yeah, so we don't currently ingest like P6 schedules or Microsoft project schedules, but that is something that we're working on. If that answers the question, I think so.
Yeah, I think it should. All right. Dejan says, do you practice at the bidding phase to review design and details and for discovered omission flag, then or allocate extra work force as predicted for the future needs? What's your normal strategy there?
You want to take that one, Andrew?
Sorry, I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
We can revisit that if they want to clarify a bit and it comes in before we end here. We'll jump to one.
I'll just say, like, I think I get it. No, we don't predict to add extra workforce to projects. What we know, the best information that we know currently is how we schedule our labor.
Okay. All right. we'll end with this last question. Kyle and Andrew, you can answer it quickly, and then we'll be at the end of the scheduled time here. So do you guys have any integrations with the Rivet platform?
Yeah, currently we integrate with our CRM for our opportunity projects. So we're pulling all that information in, as well as with our HR software, which we use UKG for all of our people data and information.
Yeah, we use Vista, and I think all of our project information and people information are integrated. So as you look at projects, when you're looking at projections on jobs and comparing that to how labor is scheduled in Rivet, that's one of the biggest things that I use in Rivet, making sure that, as I say, schedule our backlog. Like when all those numbers start to line up, you feel confident in what the labor resource profile looks like for the best that you know of your company. And then on the people side, as email addresses, addresses, phone numbers are changing, when I'm messaging people, I know that that's the information that our payroll department has.
All right. Well, as I said, we've reached the end of our time for today. We got through most of the questions that were submitted. There are some that are unanswered. Maybe the team can follow up if they're able to do so after the event here. On behalf of EC&M, I'd like to thank our three speakers today for putting together a great presentation and sharing some real world experiences and using Rivet and how it's improved their work at their companies. And thank Rivet for sponsoring today's event. We appreciate all of you for joining us today, and have a great afternoon, and be safe out there. Thanks, everyone.